Hey there, I'm Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. Welcome to Healing Outside the Box. Today's episode is called The Elephant in the Room is Actually a Cow. Now, there are many issues that come into play when we talk about the global consumption of beef. There is the biochemical issue, what's happening in our body when we eat beef, i.e., the antibiotics, the sodium nitrates, etc. There is the biological waste issue, in other words, what to do with all those huge carcasses. There is the emotional treatment of animal issue, in other words, how would we feel if our necks were locked in between those two bars for essentially all of our lives? There is the heart disease and cancer issue, which speaks for itself. There is the compassion for starving children around the world issue, or could they be eating that grain that we're feeding to the cattle? And there is the environmental or global warming issue. The last of these is what I will be talking about today. Now, my first one-on-one encounter with a cow came during my undergraduate years at the University of New Hampshire. I was asked to go into the dairy barn to get milk samples for some nutrition study that my professor was conducting. The milk samples were at the far end of the dairy barn, which housed over 50 cows in long rows on each side of the cement walkway. As I started down the center of that dairy barn, almost all of the cows turned to watch me. With their sad brown eyes, they looked like they might be begging me not to hurt them, or they might be begging me to pet them. It's hard to know, really. I found myself walking at an angle toward the row of cows on the right. As I got close enough to one cow to reach out and touch her nose, I lifted my hand and slowly patted her in downward strokes, as you would a horse. Looking back, I wonder now if we treat horses better than we treat cows simply because they are more attractive. And if that's the case, that's pretty superficial, in my opinion. So anyway, back to the topic, which is the association between meat and dairy consumption and global warming. Now, cows are ruminant animals like sheep and goats. Ruminants regurgitate what they eat and rechew it, depositing it into another pouch or stomach. That's different than pigs, for example, who are omnivores like us. Cows produce methane gas when they ruminate, and they have 4 stomachs, so there's a lot of ruminating going on, and a lot of methane. Methane gas accounts for about half of greenhouse gas emissions from cows. Much of the remaining greenhouse gas comes from several processes that manufacture meat or milk products from the cattle themselves. Cattle eat a tremendous amount of food in their lifetime, as you can imagine, and there is a decent amount of oil that is burned to feed them, slaughter them, and deal with the biological waste from all those huge carcasses. But let's get back to the methane for a minute. We used to think that methane gas was from cow flatulence, but recent evidence, and I'm not sure who does these studies, but they deserve a raise. Recent evidence suggests that the methane is from cow belching. This belching got much worse when we decided to force feed low-grade corn to these ruminants, who are not made to digest corn properly. The result is indigestion, inflammation, and GI disease, which leads to more belching. Our solution has been to give them antibiotics. And then, of course, we have antibiotic resistance in cows. What a surprise. But let's get back to the belching. Methane gas is a greenhouse gas, like carbon dioxide. But the effect on climate change is actually 23 times higher than the effect of carbon dioxide on climate change. Some third world countries with large populations are getting more disposable income now, and there's a lot more beef being consumed. The Chinese in particular have over 1 billion people now, and they're starting to consume a lot of cheeseburgers. I'm sure they would argue that the West has been consuming tons of beef for 100 years or so, and now it's their turn to enjoy those double bacon cheeseburgers with all that special sauce on a sesame seed bun. Scientists now estimate that there are 1.5 billion cows and bulls, which is, again, a lot of ruminating. Tropical rainforests are being cleared to graze and house these cattle. Now, I'm sure you know that tropical forests absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, so there is less of that going on. Livestock now use about 30% of the Earth's land surface and contribute about 18% of the greenhouse gases from all sources. Global meat and dairy consumption is projected to double from the year 2000 to the year 2050. None of this is news to most of us, but most of us are relying on someone else to figure out how to fix all of this. One group of people looking into all of this is the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO. They are not putting their eggs into the everyone needs to be a vegetarian basket quite yet. And of course, there's that whole adults have free will issue, and they do. Now, I'm just the messenger here, but the FAO officially reported that the best way to reduce agriculture's contribution to global warming is to tackle other sources of emissions. So let's take a look at that. One of the things that I am most obsessed about is our overuse of liquid anhydrous ammonia and other chemical fertilizers. As it turns out, it's one of the things on their list as well. When farms are sprayed with concentrated nitrogen fertilizer, nitrous oxide is produced, and it is a powerful greenhouse gas with no redeeming qualities. Not even at the dentist's office, in my opinion. One way to reduce the use of chemical fertilizers is certainly to reduce the use of corn and soy for purposes other than feeding people. Then we can reduce the amount of land to farm crops, and this land, of course, needs chemical fertilizers. We can reduce the oil for food production, most of which is just going to cattle, and reduce the carbon dioxide from the processing of cows into meat. The end result could be a more efficient use of the agricultural land that we have. And then if we go back to Exhibit A, which is this: less corn and soy and more grazing equals less belching and less methane. Last but not least, what to do with all that cattle poop? When livestock manure from industrial farms is left to rot, it's broken down into nitrous oxide, a major greenhouse gas. See Exhibit B. But I believe that really smart people, like those people that sent the rover thing up to Mars for no good reason, can find a way to make better use of all of this manure. Could we possibly use cow manure as a fertilizer? That's a novel idea. And perhaps find a more efficient way of doing so? I believe those smart rover people could figure that out. Could we use this manure as fuel without warming the planet? I believe so. Perhaps the most important conclusion for what all of us can do is this: maybe eat less meat and dairy products. Now, this comes directly from the FAO. Quote, "This is one of the most effective ways to reduce our personal carbon footprint and to generally reduce our personal negative impact on the environment." End quote. And here's another quote from Albert Einstein, a smart guy as it turns out. This was back in 1921. Quote, "Nothing will benefit human health and increase chances for the survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet." End quote. And oh, by the way, I have an ebook on Amazon Kindle with 30 blogs and 30 vegetarian recipes. It's called Green on the Inside. What do you know? There could be a lot of green inside and out. What a coincidence. I'll give you a link to the vegetarian recipes in the show notes. If you would like me to recommend a specific vegetarian recipe according to your preferences, you can always write me through my email or through my contact page, healingoutsidethebox.com/contact. The links will be in the show notes. I'm going to leave you with something that Michael Pollan once said. He's the author of the book Omnivore's Dilemma. Quote, "If many Americans could use one day per week, say Monday, to eat a meatless diet, it could have a dramatic effect in limiting greenhouse gases and ultimately global warming." End quote. I'm just the messenger here. But it doesn't seem like too much to ask to help put a lid on this climate change business. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.